Now, I want to warn you, there might be some strong language here because I'm very angry. All right, first of all, I'm going to show you an announcement that popped up on the opening page of a video about historical dressmaking. A lot of you say, oh, you have no interest in fashion. Well, how about this? It was on a website about the sort of dresses Scandinavian women might have worn sometime, as far as I can make out, around the 9th to the 12th centuries maybe. Here it is. Well, what do you think? And I'll have to tell you, when I saw it, I thought, gosh, I'll bet you that all those Nazis looking in on this website will think, oh dear, I can't watch this because I'm a Nazi. I'd better just go and find a video to watch about one of the Nuremberg rallies. I'll bet you that reminder has chased away hundreds, oh nay, thousands of Nazis. What has happened to crafts websites? I've heard of a knitting website that actually got closed down because it became full of rows and fury, started up by some race agitators or other. I remember I made a video a while ago about a dressmaker who practically ended up in tears about the exploitation of 19th century Indians by the British, while she was talking about a dress worn by a British viceroy at the time. Nothing at all, of course, about how the Indian princes were exploiting their own people. Of course not. And now this. How the blue blazes does an anti-Nazi announcement end up, or rather start up, on a historical costume website? However, that's not the worst of it. To begin at the beginning, as my regulars will know, I have an interest in fashion and I often talk about it, usually in a social context, and I do get very irritated when I see inaccuracies in costuming. And my idea of chilling out from the barrage of bad news is to watch videos about historical dressmaking, and this upcoming anyway is one of the websites I've looked in on from time to time. She's not the best, but she's pretty good. It's a shame I probably won't be watching her anymore, simply because I'm getting worried about being ambushed by her wokery. In this case, she was talking about the early part of the 17th century, the early 1600s. It is a very interesting period because at the end of the 1500s, that was the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, the fashion, at least among the upper classes, well, it was all about excess, really, wasn't it? There was a lot of padding. Well, sorry, there was also padding in the men's doublets and in their breeches, and then in the women's skirts. They didn't have hoops at the time, but they pushed out their skirts. They just got huge. They were like gigantic lampshades in some portraits. And there was a very great deal of lace and rich embroidery and floral patterns. And for women, there was that curly hair dressed with pearls and other ornaments, because that's how the Queen decorated herself. The men, of course, they just made do with elaborate hats. And then with the accession of James I to the English throne, it was as if a line had been drawn under the Elizabethan age. Suddenly black was the fashionable colour. Look, it wasn't just the Puritans. Black was a very difficult dye to get right, and it was expensive. So it was actually a sign of wealth, not of sobriety. But suddenly there was this explosion of black. And as you can see from this this picture here, women were covering their hair again. There was none of the fussy hairstyles. And both men and women were wearing the same black hats. So The tailoring was pared down. It was all a lot simpler. And it was much smarter than in the previous century, and of course much less much less fun. It didn't last very long, by the way. By 1630 already things were looking up again, but that's another story. Let's get back to the early 1600s. So this woman was explaining how the early 1600 costumes would work. She gave an example of a working class woman who wouldn't have been able to afford the fashionable black, and she contrasted her clothes with the clothes of a middle-class woman who could. This outfit obviously would have been her dress-up suit. But anyway, I was really enjoying the video right up until we got to the end. And we got a picture, as you see, of the two finished outfits together. And that was when she slipped this
I hope this video has inspired you to explore the clothing of the first quarter of the 17th century, as well as remember the context of this clothing. This period saw the acceleration of European colonization in America and the violent removal of indigenous people from their lands, as well as the first documented arrival of Africans in British-controlled Virginia that would lay the groundwork for centuries of enslavement. We cannot and should not separate historical clothing from its context, but instead acknowledge the difficult history as we learn more about the clothing.
Oh, I got so angry when I found myself being hit with that. What the blue blazes do those costumes have to do with the transatlantic slave trade? What possible relevance does that have? At the same time as the middle classes were wearing those ruffs and the conical hats, kids were starving on the streets of London. People were dying of cholera and plague. Women were living in a state in England of permanent second-class citizenry with few legal rights and at the mercy of their husbands or fathers. Does she bring those up when she's talking about the female costume of the 17th century? Now, that woman there, if you look at her face, she appears to have some sort of Chinese ancestry. Is she talking about the foot binding that was going on in China at the time, crippling half the population, and the slavery of other peoples such as the Japanese and Koreans? Foot binding and slavery didn't end in China till 1949, by the way. At the same time as those ruffs were being made, African chieftains were becoming immensely rich, selling other Africans, to Europeans. At the same time as James I was on the throne of England and Scotland, India was saturated with slavery and widows were being burnt to death over their husbands' funeral pyres. Does she mention that? These sorts of horrible abuses were all over the world. But no, she brings the transatlantic slave trade into the end of a video about Jacobean fashion. You know, I was really enjoying that. Then I got slapped with that sort of dumb wokery. Why? It's complete nonsense. It's vicious nonsense. It spoilt my enjoyment of the video. It made me wish never to see anything she's produced ever again. And it drove into my mind the idea that I can't even enjoy myself because I'm perpetually under a terrible cloud of original sin. What gives her the right to do that? I was simply trying to see a video about costuming of 600 years ago. It's a disgrace to do that to people. What has happened to these dressmakers? I don't know. How about looking at the costumes of the 1940s, and after talking about peplums and shorter skirts, you can then say, well, you might like the padded shoulders, but you mustn't forget the ovens in Buchenwald. Of course, you don't do that because one thing doesn't have anything to do with the other. In a recent video, I did call someone else evil for bringing this sort of thing up. And yes, I do think it's evil. It's evil because it gives people no rest. It's evil because it stabs at people's enjoyment. It's just plain evil to do that to people. Oh, and by the way, The No Nazis sign, that was a joke. How many bloody Nazis are going to be watching videos on how to make 10th century women's clothing? Although actually, now I come to think of it, the Vikings, or actually the Danes, were every bit as bad as the Nazis. Thousands of them flooded into England, especially into Scotland and the Northern Shires, and they completely displaced the native English, either slaughtering them or driving them out. The surviving native British people ended up being shoved into Wales. Do you know what the word Wales means in Danish? It means foreigner. Yeah. They came in, they displaced the population, and then they called the native Brits foreigners. Isn't that Nazi? And she's the one showing how to make what she calls Viking costumes and saying she doesn't want Nazis on her website. The whole thing is total nonsense and completely ahistorical, and I really don't like ahistoricity. Ahistoricity? Well, you know what I mean. Anyway, that is my fury for the day. I am Graniopteryx. I'm a very angry Graniopteryx. I'm to be found on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. Because YouTube frequently doesn't tell people when I've uploaded videos, I also post on my Twitter, Gab and Parler accounts when I have put up a new video, and there I am at Graniopteryx. So if you subscribe to one of those, you won't miss a video. Okay, please, like this video. I'm sorry I got so angry, but like it anyway. Share it. Contribute to the channel if you can. What else? Like, share, subscribe. It might work. And yeah, I think that's about the end of it. Whew, I'm exhausted now. All right. Till next time. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Granbo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.